Hi, I'm Andrew Williams. I'm a leadership enthusiast and I'm on the Prosperity show. And today you're going to be hearing about how you might get unstuck and make progress on something that's really important for you, as well as a little bit about my love of leadership and the importance of leadership in organisations and in communities and in society as well. I hope you enjoy it.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show, the number one place where we uncover the stories, the strategies, and the shifts behind people who've turned life's biggest challenges into breakthroughs. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and if you've ever felt stuck, maybe you're spinning your wheels despite your best efforts, I think today's episode is your permission slip to move forward. Our guest today is Andrew Williams, the founder and managing director of Agility Consulting Group. Now, Andrew, how are you doing today?
I am absolutely fantastic. In fact, I was in Sydney this week and Sydney had one of its hottest days in October. So it's delightful to be back in Melbourne where it's a little bit cooler.
Oh, absolutely. You see, if you're in Melbourne and you start talking about the weather, people might actually think you're lying, because if I look outside, it might actually have changed by the time you...
Good point. At least it feels cool, but yesterday was 37 degrees. That was warm.
Oh, absolutely. No, I love Melbourne. You know, it keeps you on your toes. You know, you never know what to, dress up as. You see, half of the time when you're going to the beach, I'm in M.E.D.I.A, just up in the north. Yes. So we go to Rye half of the time. When you're going up to the beach, I don't know whether to wear a hat, a fur coat, Speedos, and a pair of boots, you know, because you never know what you're going to meet on that particular day. So,
well, I'm a runner and I live near the beach in Port Melbourne, and I think the most important thing is a windbreaker because it's so windy down there.
Good on ya. I mean, obviously, this is Melbourne, and if we keep talking about the weather, this might be the whole episode in and of itself.
Let's talk about far more interesting things, Prosper.
I can imagine. And for those that are tuning in right now, this is not the Weather Channel, okay? So don't you touch that dial. I've got Andrew here, who is a leading practitioner in Australia around adaptive leadership and is a highly regarded coach. So he has actually authored a couple of books now, and we're going to be talking about one of them, which is Getting Unstuck, How Learning Bravely is a Superpower for Personal Change and Growth. And obviously, he's already mentioned how much of a runner he is. Here's a bit of a fun tidbit about this man here. He once ran a marathon at Mount Everest just to see what it takes to get unstuck. So if you've ever thought your career or your business challenges were all uphill, I think Andrew is here to show you what real attitude looks like. So make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening, because this show is where you're going to be finding those exclusive insights we've talked about from world-class leaders who've mastered the art of growth, agility, and transformation. Now, Andrew, I could go on and talk about things I'm not even qualified to talk about. I mean, if someone is going to be hearing or seeing you for the very first time, what else would they add to what I've said so far so they get to know you in the shortest amount of time?
It's a really good question. So I've been doing the work that I do for about just around about 20 years now, and I do a lot of work around individual coaching, so executive individual coaching. You know, I work with teams, senior teams, to help them make progress on things that are important to them. And I'm also part of the Australian Graduate School of Management, which is at the University of New South Wales. And I'm a facilitator and program director there. So I have lots of different irons in the fire, but the thing that I would describe myself the most is a leadership enthusiast. So I also have a podcast about leadership. I write books about leadership. I teach and speak about leadership. And I think if we can get more leadership in the world will be a better place.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, and thanks for leading us in to this side of you that a lot of people wouldn't have been aware of. But when kids are growing up, Andrew, the ones that I've come across, they want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a pharmacist, or a fireman, and things of that nature. Was leadership something that you always wanted to do growing up?
I don't think so, because I'm not sure I actually knew what leadership was about. I think when I was younger, I probably wanted to be an accountant. And I don't even know why. I think my dad was in numbers. He was a banker. And so I thought being an accountant would be a pretty good occupation. But then over time, as I studied accounting. I was always a bit aspirational. And what I mean by that is that I always wanted to better myself. And the way I thought the better myself was to move into leadership type roles myself. And I recognise, and I'm sure some of your listeners would recognise this, is just because one has an aspiration to get into a leadership role doesn't mean it's easy when you get there. And I think I learned some of my hardest lessons in my career in actually, leading people and leading in large organisations, because, it's quite complex work. And you don't go to university ever to learn about leadership. It might be one module, but you're not taught that. You're not taught emotional intelligence at all. You're really taught technical skills. So I guess part of a lot of the work that I do now is bringing that leadership capability more broadly across organisations.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that. You're absolutely right. There's so many things we are never taught in school, but we're expected to know in life. Taxes, how to manage money, budgeting, all of those things. And as you've mentioned, emotional intelligence is at the core of actually being a leader. Now, some people that I've spoken to usually tell me that they were really exceptional. Like you said, you were aspirational in work, and then people were just promoted in some of the roles that you then ended up becoming, a leader or in leadership positions where you supported or actually taught those things that you are now teaching other people to be, do, and have.
So I guess my first sort of opportunity was in a consulting firm. So I worked for one of the large four consulting firms. And actually leadership was pretty easy there because you had such bright, intelligent people. And in fact, one of the things I learned from that was that I would learn as much off them as they were off me. And I think that there's a strong focus on the technical side there. I think it was and I won't name the organisation, but, I worked for a large health insurance organisation just over 20 years ago before I started my business. And again, for me, and this is a bit of an anecdote that I told yesterday in a workshop, is, I always thought the role of the leader was one where they had to be the expert. And therefore, they're the ones that people need to look up to and be guided by and make the decisions, etc. And I remember my manager came to me and she said, look, you're really good at asking people for their opinions, but you also don't care a whole lot about their opinions. And that feedback was really confronting at the time. And so to get that feedback meant that I actually had to let go a bit of my own ego and create space for different voices and different contributions. And so now that lesson has stayed with me because, predominantly my work in leadership is about how do I help individuals and organisations navigate complex, tricky, messy challenges. And by doing that, you, as a leader, you can't do that by yourself. We often talk about in my work, that we're moving beyond, we're in a post-hero leadership paradigm. So in the past, we'd put the leader up as the hero, and they'll put their cape on and they can rescue us. But when it comes to big, tricky, complex problems, the leader doesn't have all the answers. So actually, when I talk about it, and I say this in my workshops, I don't have much interest in building leaders. I've got a lot of interest and passion in building leadership. And they're two different things. Just because one's a leader doesn't mean they exercise leadership. So we need more leadership in this world. I don't think we need more leaders, because I think we've got a lot of leaders. We just need more leadership in the world. And that's part of what I learnt in my previous life before starting my business. How do I help people exercise more leadership, even if they don't have a leader role there?
Right. So that brings us to, I think it was Robin Sharma that wrote a book, The Leader with No Title. So leadership doesn't necessarily have to be something designated, tapped on the shoulder. Now you're a leader. Anybody can actually lead in the space that they're working in the area that they're working in, the department that they're working in. Am my understanding what that leadership or post component is?
Yeah, that's right. Yes. So it's, I talk about leadership being a practice. So leadership is a practice, it's an act, it's a verb, it's something you do. And therefore, if we unbundle it from the position or power of a leader, then it means anyone can exercise and practice leadership. And that can actually be, in a meeting where you might have the quietest person raise something that the group has not considered, and it just shifts the focus of the group straight away. Or it might be someone with lower status that does that. The thing about leadership is that if anyone can exercise leadership, that when we have challenges, it means everyone's implicated. But what tends to happen is we look up at leaders and go, fix my problems. We see it in politics. We've got a problem with housing, or we've got a problem with crime or immigration, and we look to politicians to fix those problems, but they can't. They don't have enough power. So we need more people to exercise leadership so we can make progress on these big, tricky challenges that organisations or society faces.
I like that. And I mean, obviously, ever since I've been in Australia, I know this happens everywhere else in the world. I mean, and that's the way it is. But there's this element of tall poppy syndrome where people would automatically assume, oh, I can't be the one raising up my hand, because that's not my job and things of that nature. How does that then marry with what you're talking about? Or do you actually have to, really, really smoothen that, because that's a culture people are brought up in?
Yeah, I think there's a link here to sort of the getting unstuck part. There's a cultural thing. Yes, there's a cultural thing about the tall poppy syndrome in Australia, but also you've got the issue around the people are, and it's connected to evolutionary biology, that we have a fear of other people's opinions. So many years ago, when we're on our ancestors were in, on the plains of the savannah, to survive predators, they actually had to bind together and, warn each other of, these big, fast predators. That's the only way that they could survive. And then what happens in these villages, you'll have chiefs, and within these tribes, and then you'll have social mores and rules on how to get along. And the thing is that if you didn't follow those, if you didn't belong, you would be ostracized. And in those days, ostracism wasn't just a sense of rejection, but it also could lead to actual death. And so over time, we've learned, it's deep within inside us, that actually to survive, we need to sort of belong and we also need to be approved by others. And so I think that can stop people from exercising leadership because it sort of puts them out there. It's sort of like, well, hang on, you're not a leader. Why are you doing that? But my view is we need more of that, and people need to overcome this fear of what other people might think about them. That's the same as the tall poppy. That is purely the perception of what other people might think. And I think as a society, we need people to push through that.
Is that easy?
No, because I think it's deep inside us. You know, when we MRIs, for example, when they do a scan on the brain, they highlight that rejection activates the same part of the brain as physical pain. So, to get rejected is equal as physical pain. So it's really hard for people to do it there. But, if we are to grow as humans and society, we need to embrace vulnerability. We need to embrace this sense of writing our own story because the world's become more complex. If you're in a tribe thousands of years ago, it's pretty simple. You're just in one tribe. But we're in multiple tribes. Before we came on this call, we talked about the tribe of the expert author community. That's a tribe which has its expectations that go with that. And then I've got my friends, and I've got my family, and I've got my work colleagues, and I've got my, running group, all sorts of things that all tribes. And if they have different expectations and different perspectives, we get this push-pull. And if we're trying to meet everyone's expectations, it's very stressful. And in complexity, what we need to do is write our own story. That's really important. How do we write our own story? Follow our own internal compass there. Take into consideration those perspectives, but frame up our own perspective and have the courage to do that.
Absolutely. You see, while you're talking about that, I was just thinking to myself, every single day I get to sit in front of experts like yourself, and we have these very intelligent conversations, and just 2 meters away from here is a door that opens into my household, where as soon as I go out there, I'm the guy that takes out the rubbish. So for a lot of people, having to then work with these different expectations, like you said, with these different tribes, it's like a switch here, on off button, and some people might not know how to actually regulate, when to step up and when not to, because it's all now, like you said, we are belonging to certain tribes like that. Now, this is something that you're preaching. Have you ever come across a time where you realize that, wait a minute, you are not actually practicing what you're preaching yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember the day, nearly the time, the actual date, certainly. And it was back in April 2018. So I had read the manuscript of my first book, Survive and Thrive. It had been sent to me. It had been, I'd sort of written it, and I was going through it. And, a lot of that book was about agility. It was about stepping outside your comfort zone. It was about, how do you, as a leader and exercising leadership, how do you embrace difference and different perspectives? And as I was reading through it, I was feeling a sense of pride that I'd written this book, but I was also sensing that I was miserable as well because I wasn't practicing what I was preaching. So I was looking at it going, hang on, all the things that I'm doing with my clients and helping them, I'm not doing it for myself. I needed to turn a mirror back. So that was a really pivotal moment in my life, both personal and professional. And one of the things that it highlighted to me that I was more focused on this need to be always competent, that if I was always competent, I was safe in this world. I would be, I'm worthy in this world if I'm competent. But what that was taking me away from was vulnerability, connection, relationships. And so I realized that that was important to me and I needed to do something about that. And so I absolutely recognized in that moment that I needed. That was a pivotal moment for me to start doing some things differently there.
See, the thing about competence is we're being competent based on a technology or cultural trend or things of that nature. And if we notice based on what has been happening in our lives, technology has so much changed that if you were a competent typist, yes, I was good at that particular time. But today, I mean, like you don't necessarily even need to have a keyboard as an input function. Now, was that holding on to competency as a way of maintaining status or the status quo that you would have maybe gathered during that particular time? Because
it was drilled into me at a very young age that, be good at your grades. I was a good cricketer, be good at cricket, make lots of runs, all of that sort of thing. And then when I joined, I was an academic for a short period of time for 4 years. And that's all about deep expertise and deep knowledge. And then I joined a consulting firm, which is all about you've got to be clever and smart in front of your clients. And so I had these messages all the way through my life around the importance of competence. And, I think what's important to say here is that it's actually okay to be competent. But if you're always competent, if you're taking up the role or the need and it becomes what we call a hunger. So if something becomes a hunger, so it's okay to be competent. And, if I have a speaking engagement or I ran a workshop on Tuesday, I want to be competent in what I do. But if it's a hunger, it means that you always want to do that. And what it means is you're diluting some of the other things that are important. And so I think for me, competence was not just about the messaging I got, but also about my place in the world, my status in the world. That if I was competent, then I would get respect and probably approval. And that meant that I would continue to do it because, one of the things that I talk about in my new book is with our identity, and competency was a big identity for me, is we also have cognitive biases. And one of the cognitive biases that contribute to our identity being fortified is confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is where the brain, which is very lazy, looks for data to confirm it's the belief that it has. So if my belief is competency is really important, then my brain's going to look for data to support that. So I'll read feedback that says Andrew's very knowledgeable and smart about his topic. Great, that's fantastic, that's good for me. But it was taking me away from having more balance in my life and working on the things that were also important. Competency is one thing that's important, but it should never be a hunger. And other things should be important, like relationships, connection, and vulnerability.
See, I like what how you describe that as a hunger, because if something is a hunger, we go to extremes to satisfy that hunger, and half of the time we, like you say, we let go of that which is important, and we blindsided because we want to constantly have that sort of validation. Now, is this an Andrew thing, or does this actually happen to most high achievers, and it becomes a cage which then takes them out of alignment with who they're supposed to be as a person?
Yeah. It's a really good question. So, I've coached thousands of people and had multiple thousands in my workshops. And it is something that I do see in high achievers, that often they get seduced by this hunger. And the hunger could be for success. The hunger could be for power and reputation. The hunger could be for status. And we talk about in the work that I do about polarities. And polarities are this where you've got two opposite poles, but both are important. So, for example, breathing in or breathing out, you can't do one without the other. They're both important. I'm a runner, as you've alluded to. Running is important and recovery is important. So you've got to do both. If you focus on one more than the other, it means that the other thing that's important is not getting a look in. And for me, on my polarity was competence and connection. And I was more focused on competence and not enough on connection. And so now what I try and do is get better balance. And I'm a work in progress. I'm not perfect at this. If any of my friends or family are listening to this, they know I'm not perfect. But what I can do now, and that was part of that, April 2018, I can start to see it. So I can start to see when the warning signs are coming up that I'm focused too much on this need for competence, that I've got a hunger for it. And then I'm able to start to let go of that and focus more on the connection and the vulnerability part there. And I've had to do a lot of hard work to get there.
I was actually going to ask about, because it takes a redemptive amount of work in order for you to be able to look at yourself and actually that sport, because there's a level of awareness that you now know, when things are getting out of whack, because as you know, fish don't see the water that they swim in. They just think whatever it is, we're good. But if you've got a good hard look on yourself, it's now like that check engine light that just pops up on your car, and you know that if you don't fix this, it's going to be an expensive trip to the mechanic. Now, what did you then do in order to, first of all, get to that self-awareness and to actually, connect and fuse with yourself?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I did a whole bunch of things. I think what's important, just to respond to you, and then I'll tell you what I did, is, all of us, pretty much all of us, are walking around with a pair of glasses and viewing the world, and we're unaware we're wearing the glasses. And that's important, I think, for people to understand, because until you're aware of what you're in the grip of, until I was aware of that I was in the grip of my hunger for competence, you can't do anything about it. So one of the first things that's really important is, I'm really inspired by the work of Robert Keegan, who was at Harvard and did this work around adult development. And he talked about this concept of subject and object. Subject means that you're subject to something, you can't see it. So for me, I couldn't see that my need for competence was a hunger and impacting on me. And what we need to do is make it object, make it obvious. So what I decided to do, and one way of doing that, is through experiments. So I talk a lot in my work about, if we want to get unstuck, if we want to make change, one of the most important things that you can do is to experiment, so that you can start to learn about your identity and learn about self. There. And what that does is experiments gently disrupt your identity. It's like stepping outside your comfort zone and going, because what happens when you do that is the identity says to you, nah, not on my watch, we're not doing that. So you're trying something that's a bit new, and then your identities, you're starting to feel these swirl of emotions. It might be frustration, anxiety, fear, all sorts of stuff. And your identity says, no, we need to self-protect now. And so what's really important in your experiments is to get out there enough that disrupts a little bit about who you are, but also have the self-soothing strategies to stay in the discomfort there. So one of the things that I did in 2018, 2019 was I did stand-up comedy. Because I wanted to, I tried to do a series of experiments that would take me outside my comfort zone, and that I wasn't going to be necessarily the world's best at them. Of course, I'd been on stage in the sense that I'm a facilitator, so I'm used to speaking to groups. But it was important for me to choose to do something that was a bit of a stretch, but knowing that I'm not likely to be fully competent at this, and to actually notice the anxiety and the discomfort and lean into that there. And so that was really, really great, because for me, it tapped into the vulnerability. So one of the lessons I learned, and this might be useful for people, is there were sort of two things. The first is that life is a continuum, right? There are many podcast hosts, including you and I, in this world. And if you line them up, we're all going to be somewhere on that continuum. And that's okay. We don't have to all be Joe Rogan, for example, there. But what we want to be able to do is to be able to move and make progress. And even if that is small, that is okay. So that was one of the big lessons I learned around. I'm not the fastest runner. I'm not the best consultant. I'm not the best comedian. I'm on a continuum, and I'm doing okay as long as I'm sort of moving forward and making progress there. So I think this concept of experimentation, I can't oversell that enough. It is really, really important. And I think life is about, because it's complex, it's about learning. And we learn through experimentation. And experimentation is different to an action. An action, we often go, I'm going to go and do this. And then we think about whether it's going to succeed or not succeed. And as a result of that, we may not take the risk. But if we go into an experiment and go, what can I learn from it? That's a whole different mindset there. So that's one of the big things. And that's where the Mount Everest, running at Mount Everest was along the same lines.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you so much for that. I think it's the Japanese that have this concept of Kaizen, of constant improvement, because I think I don't know how you feel about this, but I kind of blame the schooling system for putting us in this sort of position where you only put up your hand when you know you've got the correct answer, and you only have to write a correct answer in the book. There's not that concept of, you are allowed to experiment. The answer is that, and we stay with that. And then when we then graduate and go into our lives, we want to make sure that we've got the right things going. Whereas with anything, like you're talking about podcasting and everything else, if you go back to maybe your first episodes or my first episodes, I was yelling into the computer because I didn't have the mic. and I cringed when I watched them, and how I was dressed, and just I wasn't centered. I just wanted to record, and do you know what I mean? But now we're having a conversation, and we can take this anywhere, and I'm still confident that we're still going to create something remarkable. Now, for so many people, experimenting is sort of difficult and maybe expensive on their part. Where would you say that people can start? You know what I mean? Because they've never been told to just accept whatever result that comes in without having the correct answer, or I should know this by now.
Yeah. Look, I think if we're going to engage in behavioural change, we need to find the context in which we can practice that feels safe to learn or safe to fail, for example. And what I mean by that is, let's assume that I'm coaching someone and helping them to be able to have difficult conversations. And what I don't want them to do is go and practice with their boss and ask for a raise. That might be a bit too far. So what I might suggest is what might feel safe, but still a little bit of a stretch. And it might be that they have a conversation with a friend of theirs where the friendship's strong and they just want to share something around boundaries with them, or something that the person said that sort of hurt them there. But you want to try and find something that is small and safe. I often say people, because I'm a runner, and people will ask me, how do I get into running? And I said, the thing that stops people from sustainability about running is they try too much too early. The bigger we make something, the less likely we're going to do it. So, if someone said to me, "Oh, I'm just going to go out and run for half an hour or 5Ks or whatever," after 800 meters, they're done. And one of the best things you can do is just go walk for a minute, run for 30 seconds. If you find running for 30 seconds is too much, bring it back to 20, 10, 5. But small experiments. So, in any context for your listeners, whatever it might be, a small experiment must be learning oriented. It must be doable, like you can do it, and that it's safe to learn from there. But they need to be small and doable and focused on learning there, regardless of the context.
Absolutely. But if we would look at your experiments, they are groundbreaking. I mean, stand-up comedy. I think it was Seinfeld, the god of stand-up comedy himself, who said some people would rather be the person saying in the coffin than the person saying
in the eulogy. Yeah.
And you did say run for 1 second, walk for the rest or whatever it is. You went and did a marathon at Mount Everest, of all the places. Some people would just run around the block and still come back to their bed. Mount Everest, you had to fly to go there.
Yeah, and look, it's an interesting one. I think it sounds more glamorous or impressive than it is. I mean, there is a degree of it, but I'd run marathons before, but obviously I'd never run anything at altitude. So I think for me with that one was, again, I remember I flew to Nepal via Singapore. I remember getting into the breakfast room and I had all of these hardcore endurance athletes from around the world. And then I had myself. And I just, again, you don't want to compare yourself to others because that's part of the competence thing. But I just embraced the experience, and which is you've got to hike up there. There's 180 people. We hiked up to base camp. We stay a couple of nights at base camp to acclimatise, and then you run a marathon at altitude there. And I knew that as long as I was healthy in terms of I didn't get altitude sickness or I didn't get the flu or anything like that. I thought I could do it because it didn't matter how long I had to do it under 12 hours because that was the cutoff. And I did it in 9 hours, and out of the 180 people, I came about 60th. So I did okay in the end. And I'm really happy with that. But the important thing from my learning perspective was noticing my anxiety when I was comparing myself to others, and then tapping into that vulnerability to go, it doesn't matter what happens, I'm okay. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned a lot, because my work can be complex. I can get challenged in my work. Sometimes it's difficult. But I take the attitude that regardless of what happens, as long as I prepare well, I'll be okay there. And, whether it's today or whatever, I'm comfortable in my own skin more than I was maybe 6 years ago.
Quite like that. And the one thing that I think a lot of people stay stuck is they don't want the feeling or the thought of studying over, because when you go on and start something else, like your stand-up comedy or that whole running or whatever, you're by definition a rookie and you're starting at the bottom of the piling order, whatever it is that you do. And a lot of people don't want to do that. So, which then leads to many leaders actually feeling stuck, even though things look successful on the other side. Why do you think that's so common in a lot of entrepreneur types or corporate spaces?
Yeah. Great question. People get stuck predominantly there are three different reasons, but what it looks like is people have an aspiration to make a change or get better at something. It might be an entrepreneur wants to go into a different market. It might be a leader wants to have more influence. It might be someone who wants to change a relationship or make a career choice. So they have this aspiration, and it's like having one foot on the accelerator, but underneath there is a separate, often unconscious competing commitment that which is all about safety. And so and that's the break. So what happens is we have this aspiration, but the competing commitment might be fear of failure, or it might be that vulnerability is a weakness, or you've got to be liked by others, those limiting beliefs, and they compete with the aspiration that people have. So people end up spinning their wheels because they have this one foot on the accelerator. I want to do this. I want to change a relationship. And on the other side, the brake is, what if I can't find someone? Am I going to be okay alone? So the fear kicks in there, and the identity says, no, we're going to keep you safe. And it's safer to actually stay in a relationship that's not great rather than be alone. Or it's safer to stay in a job that you don't like rather than take the risk of trying to find something that has more meaning and purpose. And part of my work in my coaching is helping people to get unstuck, to shine a light on that. Let's put up a mirror so that they can see that they're stuck and actually get into some small steps to help them get unstuck.
From what I'm hearing, I mean, obviously the work that you have done personally has obviously been able to make you the person you are today, but it's actually enhanced your own status from what you were afraid that you were holding on to before. Now, and that's a twist. Why do you think that actually embracing that imperfection actually makes people much more magnetic than them trying to, appear as if when you're internally hollow?
Yeah. It's another good question. I think part of it is that people are automatically connected or attracted to people who are human and authentic. And so if you portray yourself as this big, strong, knowledgeable, smart person, for many people, they can't connect with that. I often ask people who can't ask for help that because they feel as though it's a bit of a weakness, and what would people think of them? But then if you ask 10 people in a room, if Prosper asked for help, who would step up and help him? And everyone would do that. So people, I think, are attracted to people who are humanistic, that know their flaws, and that there's a degree of authenticity about them. I think people struggle when, because my need for competent was all about ego. If people have a need for power or status or success or achievement, sometimes that can be about ego, and that, that pushes people away rather than pulls people in. So I think that that's a key part of it, that authenticity, humanness. I'm a working. It's interesting. One of the things you said there that came to mind as you were saying it was, I feel like even letting go of this need to be always competent has meant that in some way I'm more competent and more effective at what I do. So I was fearful that if I let go of this need for competence, I might lose respect and lose work. And actually, I would argue that I feel as though that I'm at the top of my game at the moment. Like I've got to a stage in my work where I'm confident, I'm winning interesting work, I'm working with great clients, it's really purposeful the way I'm living my life. So, from that perspective, it's actually pretty cool. And that's just a recognition that I'm having right now. And thank you for helping facilitate that.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. Now, in my culture, we've got a statement that says the bird cares not how brittle the branch is because it's fully confident of its wings. And half of the
Yes.
time we used to see it as kids, a bird would have been standing on a very, very brittle branch. And as soon as it jumps off and it lips off, the branch actually breaks. And we start
Right.
wondering, how was that bird being able to be sustained by that? Or was it not afraid it was going to fall? But no, the competence was not in what they're holding on to, but it was actually in their wings. Now, if somebody has listened to this podcast and they're thinking, I'm good at what I'm doing, but something must be missing or whatever it is. You did say now you are getting interesting work and working with great clients. How can somebody self-select that they're an interesting client that maybe might consider working with you? Who are you sort of wanting to work with these days?
It's a good point. I think I'm interested in, as I said earlier, I'm interested in organisations that are navigating complex challenges, and so because I think that there is a need to build more leadership density in the world to tackle these. So if there's if you're an organized, if any of your listeners are in an organization where you're facing complexity and you're looking at how can we better navigate this complexity, that's the sort of thing that I'm interested in. And I get to, I feel lucky I get to do that with some of my clients. From an individual, same at a team level, and at an individual level, what attracts me is people who are really aspirational about leveling up, lifting up to reach their potential, and know that they're a bit stuck. Something is getting in the road, and it's been getting in the road for some time. That also appeals to me because and you'll know this just through your podcast. If your podcast helps people to be better people, that is a good thing for society. And so for me, if I can help people who are aspirational about wanting to make a bigger footprint in this world and help them get unstuck in doing that, that's joyful work. That's joyful work.
Andrew, you literally giving people back to themselves because these people already are coming in. They just need that alignment or that knighting or that, hey, you now go be a leader. And that's precisely what I'm hearing that you help people remember.
You know what it is? I think that there's lots of things in coaching, but two things come to mind. One is helping them make sense of the world that they're in because they're stuck. They're not sure, why is this always happening? Part of my role is to help them make sense of what's going on for them. So it gives them a sense of clarity. The second thing is around support, encouragement, with a little bit of accountability. I describe myself as a purposeful provocateur. So I like, or a constructive troublemaker. I like to provoke people, but I do it with care and love and purpose in the way I do it. Because I think this work, and you'll know this as I've been through this work is not easy. And one of the things I talk about in my book is you need to surround yourself with your crew to do this. You need people to support you, whether it's a coach, a mentor, your manager, your partner, friend, whatever it might be. You need that holding container where people can support and challenge and keep you accountable in the process.
I like that a lot. And surrounding yourself with a crew, because I feel like we also have a statement again. Sorry, I keep bringing back.
Oh, good.
If you want to go far, you go alone. But if you want to go further,
Yes.
you go together. And obviously, that's a crew. So for leaders that are watching right now, how can one person build a crew that actually challenges and supports them equally, because half of the people that are usually around us are usually yes people, and they don't want to ruffle feathers and things of that nature. So if you could tell the listener right now how to actually pick and choose maybe the average 5 people that they need to be around.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure I necessarily agree that people. I do think if people put their hand up, people will step up. I actually do believe that. I think if because I think that's part of the vulnerability there to say, hey, I'm working on this. Would you give me some feedback as you see me doing it? I might be a bit clunky. Or saying to a manager, I want to focus on this. If you notice when I do it well, can you let me know? I've seen people that I've coached do that with their teams. I think outside of work it might be harder. Everyone's busy, but I think if you can find 1 or 2 people, we've all got. We're not all got partners, but we've got people in our life. You only need 1 or 2 people to support you, and then that can grow there. And look, sometimes people have the resources to get professional coachings, like myself, often through an organisation. So that's a possibility as well. But if it's a good question. If it was me and in an organisation, if you had a good relationship with your manager, that's where I'd go first. The second place I would go is to find a mentor in the organisation. There, that would be the next place. Anyone you trust, I think, is important.
Absolutely. And where can people maybe go on the internet, Andrew, to maybe just have a gander at maybe putting you as part of their crew?
Yes, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Andrew Williams, and I'm more than happy if anyone wants to engage with me there, and they can also contact me via my website, which is cultivateagility.com, which I assume you may even put in the show notes.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely will be in the show notes below. And I'm encouraging people to beat a path towards your proverbial internet doors there, so they can learn a thing or two. Now, Andrew, I can't thank you enough for the time that we spent on the call today. I mean, your life story and your experience and your experiments have so much value for a lot of people that are looking to get unstuck. And obviously we can tell that you're an outstanding coach, workshop facilitator, also speaker and educator, because I was learning as we were going through all of this. So for that, I really appreciate you. But you've put a word inside my head right now, and it's experiments. Now that we are in your world, what experiments are you working on right now that we can be on the lookout for, that we can cheer you on and celebrate while you're doing any marathons in the horizon?
Yeah, no, I'm not nothing big at the moment, but a colleague and I are we've been experimenting with a podcast this year, and as you said, a podcast is an experiment, and we've learnt a lot from that. So we're going to ramp that up next year. And the other thing that we're experimenting with is we're developing a group coaching. I guess a group coaching product for people who want to get unstuck, to self-transform, and again, anything that we try with an experimental mindset, because it's learning. We'll see how it goes and we'll refine it and that sort of thing. As you've done over the years, you had your first podcast was an experiment, and you now look at you've done so many of them. So they're the 2 work ones. I think I'm naturally prone to challenging myself physically, so I'm probably next year or the year after, maybe next year, is a long multi-day hike. Something like walking the southwest coast of England, which is about 1,000 kilometres, that sort of thing. So just to test my resilience, I just think life should be about stretching and challenging ourselves and making our world bigger. Not for everyone, but it's certainly important to me because I think that's where the learning is and the growing is.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're going to be walking anywhere around Melbourne, I'd have a stand, cheering you on. But obviously,
You're
we
very
can all
kind, Prosper. You're very kind. It's been a great conversation.
absolutely. Now, for those that are watching right now, wow, what an incredible journey from getting stuck to actually becoming super powered. So, if today's episode reminded you that I don't know, growth doesn't come from knowing more, but from actually learning bravely. I think you need to get the new book from Andrew, Getting Unstuck, on Amazon. I'll be putting all those links in the show notes below, so you can actually learn how to build true leadership agility. And if you're watching this and you are an aspiring leader or you know of a leader, just maybe pass this episode to them. They might learn a thing or two so that they are also not getting stuck on the way up. And can't wait to see what you're going to do with this information right now. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and keep building on your experiments. Bye for now.